A to the K.
To the K.
To the K.
Hello, one and all. Welcome to the A to the K Wrestling Show, where joining us today is Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer of the Jacksonville Jaguars and All Elite Wrestling, the one and only MEGHA PAREKH. MEGHA, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Hopefully you guys can see a little bit of the stadium in the background here. This is actually where our offices are for right now. It's pretty fun office building to come to.
Absolutely. That's amazing.
Awesome, yeah. So if we could just sort of start, I suppose at the beginning, in some senses. So obviously you graduated Harvard Law School and ended up Vice President and General Counsel of the Jacksonville Jaguars at just 27 years old, if I'm not mistaken. So looking back, I just wondered if you could we could discuss sort of how you reflect on rising the ranks so quickly at such a young age.
Sure. So I graduated law school during the recession, and so it was very challenging in terms of the job market for legal professionals in general. Luckily, the place where I worked, they did start me on time. But when I started, I went to go work in the transactional department, and all M&A activity and finance activity pretty much stopped. But one of the very first deals that I did work on when the markets came back was the acquisition of the Jaguars for our current owner. And I've been working with the Khan family in Jacksonville for the last 10 years. I did a little bit of everything when I was at the law firm. I was there for about 3.5 years, in addition to sports transactions, which at the time was challenging because that's really what I wanted to go work on. But I learned so much during that time in the 3.5 years that I was there. I remember when they offered me the position down here, talking to a friend of mine who's still actually CFO of the Cleveland Browns, and saying, I don't know that I have the experience to take this on. And he said to me, he's like, I think you could do it. He was like, and if they think you could do it, he's like, why don't you think that you can do it? Like, just ask questions and take the chance. And I thought I'd come down here for a couple of years, then go back up north. And I never stop learning in my job. It's always interesting. Never have a boring day. I also really love the city. Like, just for me personally, like, Jacksonville's beautiful on the water. Like, I live at the beach. I never thought that I would be down here for as long as I haven't, and I love it.
Yeah, it's amazing. Obviously, I've been to Orlando a few times, Disney World and stuff like that, but I'll have to check out Jacksonville. It sounds awesome. So obviously you mentioned, like some of the deals, obviously the acquisition of the Jags, and obviously you've worked on, the acquisition of Fulham, and obviously starting AEW, to name but a few. What's been kind of your most challenging and also your most rewarding work that you've done so far?
So I would say that because there is so much and we are always learning, I kind of have to be comfortable knowing that I'm not going to know all of the answers. I just need to be able to figure out what the right questions are, and then and I have no problem asking for help when I don't know something. But I would say that is, on the one hand, it keeps it interesting, but it's also challenging when you feel like you're constantly having to learn new things, or you just don't ever necessarily feel like you're an expert. So like the breadth of the work, because the family's doing real estate development around the stadium. They just broke ground on a new Four Seasons hotel. So all of that is new and fascinating. And again, it's great because I'm surrounded by so many people who are willing to teach. And the most rewarding stuff is the stuff that no one ever sees or hears about, really. So when I first started here, I also had HR and IT, and the HR side, I wasn't trained as an HR professional, and I ended up doing some like more traditional HR training. But one of the best things I've ever done in my entire life was, I would say at any moment, about 5% of our employees are in some state of crisis, whether it's a divorce at home that's impacting them at work. And so in 2017, after a friend of mine passed from a heroin overdose, I was looking for training in how you could help people that are in crisis. And I found out about an organization called Crisis Text Line, which is also in the UK. And they basically train you for, it's a very intensive training. It's one of the most challenging like education things I've ever done in terms of education. But they train you in terms of the structure of a conversation, of how to de-escalate someone who's in crisis. And it could be anything. And you do it all via text. So I finished the training. You volunteered for 200 hours, and that was the return back. I used those skills every day, especially once COVID hit, because what it really did help with, like, I am the sort of person who's uncomfortable if I'm not prepared. And there's no way that I would have been able to help people in terms of de-escalating suicides, helping them with depression, helping guide them through substance abuse. Without that training, like I think that it really helped me feel comfortable that no matter what comes up, I know how to stay calm and I'll be able to help with it. And I hope that it's made me not only just a better coworker, but also a better sister, friend, daughter. Like the training was absolutely incredible and one of the best things I've ever done. And it's feeling comfortable and privileged, even though there's moments where I get exhausted when I'm working with other people, and I take a step back when I'm able to and say, it is a privilege that if someone else is having their crisis moment, they reach out to me for help. Like, and I'm grateful to be able to do that, and that I have the training and skills to be able to do that.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah, I'd say it's wonderful. Like you say, it's the type of thing that you probably don't hear of a lot, or even sort of expect from your position. But that's absolutely fascinating. So obviously we talked about, or alluded slightly to the people you work with, but you obviously work very closely with another extremely busy individual in Tony Khan. So I just wondered if we could sort of speak on sort of what the dynamic is like between the two of you and what it's like working with Tony.
Tony, one of the things that I really enjoy is that his brain works so much differently than mine. And I like that because I feel like I am also just constantly learning from him in terms of his perspective on things. I want to be around people that I can either learn from or teach something to. And that's sort of how I decide. So he's got one of the biggest, just kindest, most empathetic hearts in a leader. And I think that it really shows that you can be a leader of a successful organization while still having such a huge heart. I thought that the way that he was able to put together the show after Brody Lee, John Huber passed, I not in a million years am I creative enough or thoughtful enough to come up with what he did for that show. And that to me was still one of our most impactful shows that we've ever done.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's one of those. It really just was incredible what was achieved, in such a terrible times as well. But obviously, so we know that you're a big sports fan growing up. Were you a fan of pro wrestling when you were growing up?
So I have an older brother who's 3.5 years older than me, and I would follow him around all the time. He watched a lot of wrestling, so of course I watched wrestling. My birthday is actually right around the time of WrestleMania, and so from, I don't know, probably like 6 or 7 till I was about 12, every year I'd ask my parents to buy that on pay-per-view as my birthday present. The day that I stopped watching was the day that Bret Hart turned heel, and I just couldn't handle it. I just couldn't. Absolutely broke my young little heart. And so I did watch a ton of it when I was a kid, but stopped around the time that I was about 12. It's never something, obviously, that like when I took this job that I saw becoming a part of my career. And what's really helpful is that, we have a general counsel at AEW he's been a fan his whole life. And it's helpful because he and I can sort of work together, and he really does help contextualize things for me at times that I may not understand to the extent that they're unique to wrestling. But I'll say that a lot of our talent too have been incredibly generous with their time in terms of helping to educate me about things that I may not totally understand about the pro wrestling industry. So like I didn't know how they put together matches. I didn't know how what the independent circuit was like. And so it's been really helpful because people are so willing to share their industry knowledge with me.
Yeah. I'm going to have to go slightly off script a little bit, so I'm curious.
Please.
With you mentioning your brother being a wrestling fan growing up, how has he felt about some of the people you've managed to meet just in working in AEW?
Even Brett, obviously.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. I'm still the best thing about family is that they just still treat me like little sister. Like it doesn't matter what I do, right? Like he gets it and he's very sweet and he's cool, but he's still a big brother. And still acts like one. And we're fairly close, and we tease each other all the time. But yeah, they do a great job of keeping you grounded. He's got 3 kids that are 10, 8, and 6, and they were just down here. And it's such a good reminder about what's really important. They were here for a week, and I felt so refreshed after a week with them because it reminds me of all the good stuff in life and why you work. I'm glad that I'm in a position where I am able to do so many things that are hopefully helpful to people, but hanging out with your family, there's nothing beats that. Just sitting on the beach with them all day, and they do not care who is calling. They don't care what's happening. It's nope. I want to spend time with Aunt Megan. That's what matters, right? So
yeah,
that's awesome.
What do you two love about pro wrestling? What attracted you to it, and what made you want to do this?
Great question.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I mean, I got into wrestling in like 1991, 1992 when I was about 3 years old. It was just again similar. So like family were watching it, my dad was watching it, my brother was watching it, and then I just kind of got hooked on it then. So obviously Bret Hart is my favorite as well. And it's just kind of the story side of things, and watching them kind of overcome those challenges and things. And it's just I don't know, it's really hard to put into context, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's just
it is like you say, it's kind of storytelling, not theatrics, because like I was always a big fan of The Undertaker, which is probably the more ludicrous side of the storytelling, but in a really fun way. I would say, yeah, always appealed to me as a kid, and I suppose now it's very much out of nostalgia as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when it comes to working in sports in general, but in the pro wrestling business, have you found there's sort of a big difference, or has there been any sort of surprises in terms of the difference between like the pro wrestling industry and other sporting areas you've worked?
Yeah, I would say that in a great way, Tony's brought a lot of what other like professional leagues do in terms of health and safety to AEW. And I think it's interesting to me because there are times when I think that like our talent, just because of some of the like treatment that they've received on like the independent circuit, are like shocked at the level of care that he otherwise provides, especially when it comes to health and safety. But it's been wonderful to have, like, AEW was a startup, but it was a startup that had two sister properties in sports. So for instance, when we were coming up with our COVID protocols, we were able to innovate and come up with our own, but we're also able to look to how the other leagues and teams were doing things. And that was incredibly helpful at a time when there was so much uncertainty. And so is it different? Of course, but I also think that like AEW really benefits from having these other sister properties in Fulham with its rich history and tradition, and with the Jags too, just so that we can sort of look across the companies where it makes sense to have differences, we'll have those differences, but where it makes sense to be consistent, we'll do that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got to talk about the huge news, AEW All In coming to Wembley in August. What can we kind of expect from the show, and how did the decision come about to put on the show at Wembley? I think a lot of people thought it might end up in Craven Cottage because of the Fulham links. Is it something that's been in the work for, a while?
It has been. And so, the Jags were one of the first teams and have consistently played over in London at Wembley for a long time. And I think that Tony felt really strongly that the market would show up. And so he, that's the incredible thing about working for him, is that he is sort of a really fearless leader in that sense of, let's go, if we're going to do it, let's go for the biggest possible venue. And so, we luckily do have some familiarity with the operations of Wembley from being there as part of the Jags games. And so we'll be able to, have the knowledge of what that building can support, but then obviously set it up for AEW. But our production team's working through it right now in terms of all the detail. And I'm so excited for AEW's growth over the last 4 years, right? Since it was founded. It's just, I never would have necessarily had thought that it would have launched and been as successful as it was. It survived as a live events business through COVID, and then been back on the road and continuing to grow. So I know that we always keep on trying to sort of look ahead and see what we can do and what we can expand, but it's also pretty incredible what's been built over the last several years.
Yeah, definitely. It's important to take stock at times, isn't it, to be fair?
Yeah.
So obviously, while Carl's mentioned All In, have you yourself ever had a chance to visit the UK before? I think you may have alluded to it then, but if that's the case, how do you find this side of the pond?
Yeah, no, especially even before COVID, I used to go out there fairly regularly. So I would go out for our Jags games, but also Fulham's lawyer is wonderful, and I really, really enjoy working with him. And so I'd go out there and we would meet a few times a year. When I was younger, my parents did a lovely job of trying to take us on trips, but we didn't have a ton of money. So I'd never been over to Europe until 2012. And then I love it because you can get to so many, not only do I love London, but you can get to so many other places and countries. And so when I would go out there for trips, I've gone pretty much everywhere that Eurostar will take you to from London, because it's just, once you're there, it's so easy. And I love traveling new places and learning new things. So
yeah, absolutely.
The history of London is so fascinating too, because we just don't have anything like that, right? So when you walk around and you still see things from World War II, we don't have anything with that deep rooted history here in the same way. I love the Tower of London. Like that to me too is just like such a good example of all the layers of the different, the history that's there. And it was such like a warm and friendly place overall from my perspective. Like I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. You'll have to try and come up north next time. Obviously, we're kind of more from the northwest, so Liverpool way. Definitely check that out next time you come up. How kind of excited are the wrestlers to come over? So obviously, there's a lot of talent who maybe have never even worked in the UK before, but then obviously there's kind of a growing kind of talent now who are Brits as well. How excited are they to come kind of back as part of AEW and perform over here?
Yeah, no, I think that our talent in general, like they also really do appreciate the growth, right? Like even going to Canada this past year, last October was, I think overall a really fun experience because I'm not in their shoes, so I don't want to speak for them, but from my perspective, what I think is that they really they do what they do because they love being around the fans and making them happy. And so for them, I think the benefit really is if you go into a place that you haven't been before and people are extra excited to see them perform, I think that helps sort of boost and lift them up too.
Yeah, definitely.
So one of the many projects that you oversee with AEW is the community outreach program, AEW Together. I just wondered if you could sort of talk to us a little bit about the program itself and some of the work that has been done, and whether we could maybe see something similar when you come to London.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are talking to Fulham's head CEO of their foundation sometime this week, just to get their ideas and feedback. And again, it's so great being able to have these other properties where we can get help and rely on. But yes, we're going to start planning something there. But AEW Together, to me, at its best. And I wasn't in Pittsburgh this past week, but I heard that a number of our talent went to a place called Highmark Caring Place that focuses on childhood grief and how to help people with it. And I think that it's moments like that where there's some article that I read that the different ways to reduce stress, one is meditation, one is I forget what the second one was, but sort of your normal self-care, relaxation, whatever. But the third is apparently volunteering. And so to me, it's not only good for the people that they're going to see, but it's also good for our staff and our talent who get to engage with one another in these different ways. And then hopefully we're able to help people or raise awareness or learn something along the way. And so we've had a handful of activations where you can tell that not just the people that they're visiting, but also our talent seems to be really motivated and happy. One of the most fun events that we did was a basketball tournament that Kenny, the Bucks were at, Jade was at, and she's played basketball, and it was really all the idea came from Don Callis, and to me that's the example of a great activation where people feel bought in, participated, had a lot of fun playing games, and raised some money for the high school that we were playing at.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like the kind of ideas come from all over as well. It does kind of really embody the together kind of aspect of it that anyone can kind of feed into that, which is awesome. Pro wrestling as well at the minute is in somewhat of a boom. Obviously thanks in no small part to AEW and creating that alternative and that extra kind of offering. There's so much talent out there now who are available, and there's so many different destinations where they could potentially end up. Obviously, AEW just signed the likes of Jay White, and you're kind of signing loads of the top talent at the moment. What would you say is kind of some of the big things you're finding that people are choosing to sign for AEW over some of the other promotions out there?
I would say that just some of the feedback that we've heard is that they really do appreciate the environment, which the working environment, where in a really good way, we have so many people who are just we work hard, right? And people are on the road and that can be exhausting, but when everyone has a moment to take a breath, there are so many just good people there. And that's what makes you want to give your discretionary effort, right? Is that we actually like your coworkers or you like the other people in the locker room, and it makes it just a more fun environment for everybody. And I've obviously never been anywhere else, so I can't speak to that. But I was talking to one of my coworkers, it's just so nice that for the most part, when we're working on things or working late or whatever, at least we're working with people that we all really enjoy being around. And that makes it so much more fun.
Yeah, I think anyone we've spoken to from AEW and I've always said about the environment and the backstage just being so fun and enjoyable. So it definitely rings true.
Definitely. So obviously working in the sporting world in general does have its big personalities, let's say, when it comes to the talent. So obviously, in your role, what would you say is the most rewarding or challenging aspects of managing talent and contracts?
So look, I always try and meet people where they are, right? And it's the same is true on the football side, where we have so many different types of staff that like people may not realize. So I try my best to, like, if I'm talking to a coach, like my goal is not to necessarily communicate in a way that's like most natural or easy for me, but it's to try and get them to maybe understand something or explain something or agree with my perspective or position on something. And so no matter who I'm talking to, I will always try and do it in a way where I think is most comfortable for them, as opposed to what's most comfortable for me. And that's something that it took me years to sort of learn. But yeah, like when I sort of don't persuade somebody of something, I don't necessarily think, oh, they're not listening. I think, okay, how can I say this differently to try and get them to be bought in, or explain it in a way that I sort of look back and it's like, I can't control what they're like, how they process things, but I can control how I deliver the message. And there's a handful of like very like excellent books about negotiation that helped in terms of just me, like every conversation, if you think about it as a negotiation, and not in a negative way, but it's just like, what is the purpose of me communicating? It's probably to try and get someone to agree with a particular perspective that I have on a situation. And if that's the case, then what's the best way for me to communicate to them so that it's most comfortable to them? And I go through all kinds of gymnastics, like whether we're talking to coaches or city council or whatever, like I'll change how I dress, I'll change how I present myself. And it's really a matter of just trying to make it so that they feel comfortable. And with the talent, for instance, like I don't think that if I presented myself as like a traditional like uptight lawyer that like addressed the way that I did last time, like I don't think they would like necessarily, like so much of my job is based on people like having trust in me. And like I need to be somebody that's not necessarily like someone that seems so much different from them, because then they will be distrustful. Like I'd rather present in a way that makes them comfortable, based on who it is that I'm talking to.
It's fascinating, the fact that you can kind of, do that as well. And, the learnings that you've had, I think, is really fascinating. Early on in AEW, we did get to see you a couple of times on TV, in like the contract signing segments and things like that. So I'm just curious, how was your experience on TV, and are we maybe going to see you again on TV at any point in the future?
No, I'm terrible at it. I am better off behind the scenes. I get so nervous and uncomfortable. Like people probably don't realize, because I do what I need to do for my job. Like I'm pretty introverted. So like I don't have any interest in getting like on screen at all. I will save that time for the people that deserve it and have experience in it, because it is not my strength. Like I just, no joke, like just get so nervous and like just am sweating the whole time. It's awful. Once a year I will, and it started in 2018, but I'll go play, I take my guitar and my amp and I go play a set down the street. And so I did it on Thursday, and like in the hour right before I was about to go do it, nothing at work stresses me out this much, nothing. And I'm not like getting paid. Nobody cares. It's just my friends with like a dive bar. But the hour beforehand, I was like, I'm so nervous. I was like, I make myself so anxious before I do it. But it took me like 5 or 6 songs to like warm up and calm down. But I like doing things that make me uncomfortable because it's good practice. But no, I don't. They're far more talented people that should be on the screen.
Again, a very slight digression, but I'm curious now. You mentioned obviously your guitar and your amp, and I do think we're probably going to pick up on that slightly later. But so can I ask sort of what your musical inspirations were?
Sure. So I am not a particularly strong singer, to be honest. So I did, as an adult, take vocal lessons a couple of years ago. And it was funny because it was me and like a bunch of kids getting dropped off by their parents at this music school for the most part. But so I do have a somewhat limited range, but now I like the stuff that I like playing when I'm by myself is kind of like, it's totally all over the place. Like I grew up a hair metal kid, like loved it, absolutely loved it. Grew up loving Bon Jovi. And then in about 2003, so I wrote my thesis in college on heavy metal. And by the time I was done, I was like, I cannot listen to anymore. Like I just need a break for it for a minute. And that's when Bon Jovi actually started hitting the country charts in like 2003. And so I was like, okay, like let me give this a try. And I listen to a ton of it now because it's sort of where like mainstream radio like lost like rock and roll. And there's a lot, I think it's a lot more of like, the guitar solos and like Keith Urban are to me, like you can't find that on the regular radio. You couldn't for a while. Country's a lot more popular now. But so it's a mixture of everything on that set list, from Bob Dylan to Justin Bieber to like No Diggity to T.I. Like it's all over the place.
That's fairly eclectic, to be fair.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Right, sorry. After my digression, that's a family question. So while we were talking about new TV shows, obviously AEW All Access has been come out recently and it's been really well received. And obviously the aim of the show is to give an insight in the behind the scenes. Is the aim of the show, is it to sort of attract a new audience or demographic with the sort of that sort of insight?
Yeah, I think so. I also think that, like, in the same way that honestly for me it was such a learning experience to see what their process is like, and I enjoy it. Like I just enjoy learning new things. And so to me it was fascinating to see like what it's like for them as they're putting matches together, getting ready to go out, right? Like what goes into the process as it relates to storytelling. And so yeah, I mean, I think that the hope is obviously that it'll help attract a different type of audience, attract more people to watching not just All Access, but also of course the main programming. But fans, what we found is that a lot of fans really enjoy the behind the scenes content, like even when we're posting it on social and whatnot. And so it was an opportunity to do that at an even higher level.
Yeah. Well, as two fans, that's one area that we constantly have a fascination with is sort of what sort of goes into putting a show together. So like for us, it's a fantastic sort of out look into that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we've only got 2 episodes over here in the UK so far on ITV, but yeah, I've seen both of them. They've both been really fascinating. So looking forward to the next. So something else,
a lot of people, gives you a newfound respect for how unique it is that what they do, right? Like our talent, unlike other athletes, are just an amazing, to me it's like an interesting mix of like athleticism, of acting, and I can't pick up a microphone and just like speak off the cuff like that. Well, I just can't do it. And it's always amazing to me to see what goes into it and how talented our talent actually is.
Yeah, there's a lot more than people realize, I think, isn't there? Even just from like, as you say, from the promos and the wrestling, but then everything else backstage and the relationships and, everything you've got to kind of manage as well. It's been fascinating. Something a lot of people are excited for is the new AEW video game coming soon, Fight Forever. So we're just curious, when the game comes out, who are you going to play as first?
That's such a good question. I don't know. I would probably like create my own if I could and do that. But yeah, no, I think that it'll be a great way because there is such like a strong overlap to some degree, and so many of our talent also like love playing and have Twitch streams. So it'll be really fun to see them engaging with it as well, in addition to the fans. But it's also just a great example of how the business has grown, right? Too, in terms of a new line. So between international and the video game, it's going to be a really, really exciting year for us.
Absolutely. You'll have to emulate Jeff Jarrett and have you create a wrestler, hit someone with a guitar.
Love it. So there is another wrestling lawyer in Smart Mark Sterling. So I just wondered what your relationship is like with Mark, and do you ever help him brush up on his legal talk?
Honestly, so he's one of the people that I was thinking about, because I remember the very first time that he was on our show and he was speaking, I was like, man, like he is so like, we should never have me on again in like a contract signing segment. Like this guy is great. I think I forget what he was doing, but I think he was like with MJF at the time. But I remember we were here at Daily still, and I was just so impressed. But no, they do ask me a lot of their random questions at times, but Mark is more than skilled at putting together and delivering his own promos.
So being so ridiculously busy as you are, do you ever manage to get any downtime? Obviously, we've spoken about playing the music and things like that, but do you get time to do much else?
Yes, I do. And people, it was an unhealthy like model for me when I first started working, and I think that there is this idea that people who work all the time, like as a society, we valorize it, right? Like we valorize not sleeping, and like that somehow, like that's the thing. Like no, like I take care of myself every single day. Like I will sleep an average of 7 hours every night of the week, and if I can't, then I'll try and make up for it, like on either end, because you just can't function without it, or I can't at least. Like I just get so cranky, and I'm not as sharp. And like I know this from when I first started my career, and I was working a lot, and I realized I was like, I'm not actually as at some point there's just diminishing returns, and like I am too tired and I'm not taking care of myself and I'm not giving the best of myself to my clients or to my coworkers or to my family and friends. And so one of my favorite things about like since moving down to Jacksonville is that one, like I love being outside in the sunshine, and like the environment's just better for that. And so I like really do prioritize like sleeping, eating as healthfully as I can, like during the week. And then it's non-negotiable for me to exercise. And I used to not, and I never lifted a weight until 2018. But I started then and I was like, I love this. Like that just, and I'll try to keep it to no more than like an hour a day, but that hour is just for me and it feels great. And then I do like because your mind wanders, right? Like there's so many times where I will get like good ideas while exercising or while like actually not working. I will think of something about work in a different or new way. And so to me, it's really important, like at least just for how I would like to operate. Like I make time all the time, and I try not to work too much because I can sprint for short periods, but no one can sprint or I cannot sprint forever, at least I should say. And like it makes me, I think, better able to give more of myself to my coworkers if I do make time for myself. I also try like to learn something new every year. So in 2018, I did that crisis training. I took a course. I thought that the information about nutrition in general is just so questionable. So I went and took a course online and became a certified nutritionist right before COVID hit. I did another training about like suicide prevention and became trained as somebody that could actually train other people in it, which was really rewarding. And then last year's, because I got a dog, I took a free online course in dog psychology, but it was actually like fantastic. Like it's so interesting in terms of, it really talks like about the domestication of animals and how my favorite part about that course was it explained that, you know, you think of intelligence in sort of one way in terms of like, is a person like natively smart and can they do math and all that? And like, if you change the way that you think about that, like dogs are incredibly smart, even though they see like they're not like going to do calculus. They're incredibly smart because they figured out how to communicate their needs to humans and basically have all of their needs met by humans. They're like, so intelligence doesn't like, don't think of it in just such like a one-dimensional way, right? Like they're incredibly smart in their own right. And I just thought that was so fascinating because even for people, like I will say, like I had to learn empathy in a way that it's not necessarily natural to me, but there's so many people that I can think of who are just like more emotionally intelligent, kinder like people than I am. And it's like, that's like something that I aspire to. And that is like smart in its own way, right? Like you can be a person who just understands other people better. And that should make you intelligent, whether or not you have like the best test scores.
Yeah. That makes a lot of
Amazing.
sense, to be fair.
Yeah.
I never looked at it that way, but
Yeah, exactly.
So I did slightly digress before onto music, so I'm going to try and go back to the original music questions now. But obviously, as Carl mentioned, we are both from Liverpool, which is the home of the Beatles. So I just wondered if you had any particular favorite British artists.
I will say, like, I did go through like a very solid Beatles kick when I was a kid. I did have Wonderwall on my set list because it's just such a constant crowd pleaser. But yeah, those are like, that's probably two of my favorites. What are yours?
Oh, I mean, I'm a massive Beatles fan, to be fair. I love the Beatles. Yeah, I mean, Oasis are up there as well. I mean, can you count Snow Patrol and people like that?
This is where I'm
Maybe.
struggling because I think
Yeah.
most of my music goes elsewhere.
I know, yeah, we're more into like the American rock, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go
Yeah.
to the 80s, to Guns N' Roses and such
Yeah,
like
Yeah.
that.
I mean, me too, guys. So I should just stick to that part of the conversation.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Beatles song?
Ooh, I'm a big fan of Sgt. Pepper, Hard Day's Night, Twist and Shout. Probably some of the ones I like to. Yeah, just to name a few. What's yours?
8 days a week.
Nice, that's a quality track.
Brilliant song. So you mentioned obviously Wonderwall, one of the songs on your set list, and you kind of talked a little bit about your favorite music. What are some of your favorite songs to actually perform, and why?
So this is going to be a longer answer, but bear with me. So on May 21st of 2021, I was asleep on my couch. I woke up, a guy had broken into my house, and he was just looking for money. But I woke up, I punched him in the throat. I ran out the door to my neighbors. They had heard me screaming, so they met me at the door. I went and was like just sitting on my neighbor's kitchen floor for a minute, and like I was crying and having trouble breathing, and I was like, somewhere in my brain I was like, I know that I need oxygen. And he was like, do you want to go sit on the couch? I was like, no. I was like, take me outside. So I went outside, called 911. I don't have any memory of the phone call itself. But whatever I told the police, they were incredible in their response. Like, they came at the building from both sides. He had already left the place, but he dropped his wallet in my home. The police talked to my friends and I for they were next door when the guy broke in. They talked to us for a couple hours. The next day, like a complete lunatic, I got up in the morning and went to work. And as I'm walking into a meeting with our coach and GM, the police actually called and they said that we think that we found him. So I left that meeting. By noon that day, like, he had confessed, he had dropped his wallet at my house, and he was in jail. And so what was interesting to me about that, and this is why it's a long answer, is like, I knew that I wasn't going to be myself, right? Like, all I knew, especially from all of the counseling that I had done, was I'm going to, like, I don't even know how I'm like, it's going to change. Like, I know that I'm not going to be 100%. And for like 2 weeks after that, I couldn't even put on shoes. Like, it was but I felt like, okay, at least I know how people respond to trauma, and I know that I'm going to need to take extra care of myself. And so one of the things that I didn't really realize till after the fact, but there's a Eric Church song called Never Break Heart. And I would listen to that like on repeat because it has such a consistent, like, steady rhythm. And it's not that popular of a song. Like, I don't even know if it was ever released or not as a single, but I played that live just because that song like reminds me so much of that time. And like the message of it is like that, it's like, even when bad things happen, basically don't give up. And I used to listen to that like even because I was working and I never stopped, I would just need like a little bit of time to be like away from people because like I would get like very jumpy if somebody was behind me. And so I would just put my headphones in, do a couple of laps around the stadium listening to that song, and then come back. And I knew that I was going to need to have like extra coping mechanisms. I also told everybody at both companies after it happened, because I was like, I want them to understand, like, if I'm not myself, like, it is because of this. And people were just really sweet and thoughtful. Like, to your point about leadership, like, everybody was so generous in terms of like having empathy for me during that time. So it was like, you know what, like, I can only like do so much today. And people really were like kind about it. And I probably I've never been more tan in my entire life, because I would spend like all day walking on the beach, basically, just like, for a couple months after that. But yeah, I mean, it was scary that it happened, but really in a lot of ways, like, I had empathy for the person who broke in, because it's like, you like, somewhere along the way, like, you just got lost. Like, he was a drug addict looking for money, and he's now going to be sitting in jail for 10 years. And so, yeah, but it was definitely like a really good learning experience for me in terms of like some of the things that I was experiencing. I was like, I'm so used to counseling other people. Like, I basically was like doing it to myself. And it gave me a lot of empathy for people that, like, I was never jumpy in crowds before, and like I'm unreasonably confident. Like, to your point, like, I'd walk around Paris by myself at 2 a.m. And then all of a sudden I felt myself like having anxiety for the first time. And I was like, you know what, this is good, because then I never really understood other people and what it was like for them if they had it. But now I do. And I have a different, like, newfound appreciation for it. And hopefully then I'll be better able to help other people.
Wow, I had no idea about that story. Fair play for being able to bounce back so much. Like, a few years ago, like, I got burgled right before Christmas. Luckily, I wasn't in my house, but I came home and obviously all the presents under the tree were gone and things like that. And like, still to this day, like, sometimes I still struggle to sleep. It's like, it's crazy. Yeah. But it's like, it's mad how it can kind of impact you in that way. But fair play for being able to deal with that, and obviously finding an outlet in music and everything else you've done to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like you said, like, it's almost like accepting, because I remember I just so quickly was like, I want to go back to normal. And then at some point I was like, there isn't that. Like, that's not, like, there's no like, oh, like, it's just going to go back to what it was. Like, it's always going to be a part of me, and it's always going to impact me in some way. And the goal is just to like acknowledge it. Like, I'm with you, but like, I still have trouble sleeping about it sometimes. But like, okay, if that's the case, then like, what can I do to like make that time that I'm actually awake then productive? And then I'll just get up and either start working or reading or whatever, and then go back to sleep when I can. Because it's just, I do think that like I had this vision in my head of like, oh, like the ideal night of sleep is like 8 straight hours, and like you're just like right curled up. I'm like, that's just not, I think, the case for most people. But people really don't like talk about how many people like have those challenges, and I just try and make my insomnia productive for me, so that it's coming to some good use, and then catch up when I can.
Love
it. So this is going to seem like quite a changing topic now, but we've seen AEW using a lot of licensed music as of late. So I just wondered if like you could sort of go into sort of what goes into sort of getting the rights to certain songs, and are there any that you're sort of actively working on to try and get?
So I will say that, like, this is one where it's so like fun to watch when there's such like a natural fit. Like Mock's coming out to Wild Thing, like I couldn't imagine a more perfect like synergy there, and it really does, I think, help when we do find the song like that. Like I think it really does, like, just it puts you in like a different, like more confident mindset. I think, like, from our perspective, it really depends on like, does it make sense, and will it really enhance like the programming and the talent, and be a good fit not just for the talent but also for the like artist or the song itself. And so there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but I think that we have also a really talented in-house person who creates the music for us, and he does a tremendous job, is incredibly productive and really, really talented. And so it's really a matter of figuring out, okay, like, is there a reason to deviate from using Mikey and what he's produced, and going to a popular song because it'll really enhance or make the show more special.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I will follow up now because I'm curious. If you had to have an entrance music, what song would you pick?
Gosh, I don't know. I never thought about it. I have to think about that one. That's because I can never see myself going out there and doing what they do. I think about that all the time. Like, it is just so amazing, like, watching. And it's nice sometimes not being on the road, because then I can actually watch the show. Whereas if I'm there, it tends to be more difficult to catch it. And like watching from home, like, it's just amazing to me what these guys are able to do. Amazing.
Yeah,
and women. I meant guys colloquially, but yes.
Yeah,
of course. Obviously, talking about an incredibly busy period is exactly what's coming up for AEW. Obviously, Double or Nothing's in Vegas, Forbidden Doors in Toronto, and obviously All In at Wembley. A lot of traveling going on. Are you going to be at the events? And if so, what you're looking forward to most about visiting each of those cities?
Gosh, Vegas is a place where I feel like no one should be for more than 3 days, just because it's too easy to get into trouble. But no, so I don't gamble at all, and it's not for any reason. I just don't enjoy it. Like, the part of gambling that people enjoy in terms of like there being risk and reward, it just stresses me out too much. Like, I don't like it. But so because of that, I basically, like, I've walked up and down that Las Vegas Strip so many times, and there's so many unique things in the hotels. So there's a zoo behind the Mirage, and I went there once and I ran into like Siegfried and Roy was there, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, and so I sort of go off the beaten path wandering around Las Vegas and trying to find other places. There's a dueling piano bar at Harrah's. I'm trying to think of where else I've really gone, but I walk up and down basically the whole strip and try and find new places. I love live music, and there's a lot of great bands playing there. And then there's one of the best museums I've ever been to is actually in Old Vegas. It's a museum about the history of the mob. And I can't remember what I think the building might have been a courthouse in the past, but I'm not entirely sure. But I think it was. And they do such a good job. It's not like a museum where you're just walking around reading things. Like, there's so much multimedia. There's a scene where they like project holograms so that you can see like what a trial was like of famous mobsters, and it teaches you an incredible amount about like the history of Vegas and how it was developed. And it's just a really cool place to check out. London, it's been a while since I've spent any meaningful time there because of COVID, and so I'm excited just to go back, and we'll have to come back here for All Out the week after, but it should be really fun just to see. I'm most excited to see a wrestling ring in the middle of Wembley Stadium, because like I think that will just be so unique to see, especially because we see it for football. And I saw Metallica and somebody else, but Metallica was at Twickenham Stadium a couple years ago when I was out there, and that was just also so cool to see in terms of like that, like a metal band of that sort, like playing at a football soccer stadium. So like, I'm excited about that. And then, Canada was a really warm and welcoming market for us this past October, and that was our first international show. So I'm excited for us to go back there and see how different it is. But July should be a really good month for us just in terms of exposure in different markets and to different crowds.
No, definitely.
Gosh, now I'm tired thinking about it.
Oh, apologies. One of the last questions from us, we just wondered if you had any advice for anyone sort of aspiring to work in, I suppose, in your particular area of, apologies if I'm saying it wrong, but like sort of legal in the sort of sports world.
Yeah, no, I do get asked that question a lot. I have no advice, because if you ask people who are in these roles how they got there, everyone will tell you that it is a unique story. And so what I really would say is, like, one, the hardest thing for me is, like, people don't realize, like, I applied to hundreds of jobs that I did not get. And, like, you just have to be really good at understanding, like processing that rejection, not taking it personally, and move on. And, like, I'm not kidding when I say hundreds. Like, there were hundreds. And you just, like, it's not fun, but being patient is probably the toughest part about finding a job in sports. But, you know, putting yourself in the right position is important. The other thing is that, like, what people don't realize, I think sometimes, is how small the sports world really is. And I think I was at a conference listening to, like, Larry Lucchino when he was at the Red Sox speak, but he said something that he's like, this is going to sound really trite, but he was like, be nice to people. It's really important to just be nice to people. And that's true, because you run into the same people in, like, these circles over and over again. One, it's also just the right thing to do, but two, like, there is no reason you can, like, zealously advocate for your client while still being kind. And I really appreciate when I work with lawyers who, we have the reputation that we have in terms of being difficult, right, or arguing. But my favorite people to work with are the people who sort of look at it like, okay, this is a puzzle that we have to figure out, and how can we do it together to get what's best and what's fair for everybody involved, as opposed to being so adversarial.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talk about kindness. I think, obviously, Megha, you're so incredibly well liked and respected across the whole industry. You know, I don't think anyone's got a single bad word to say about you. And obviously, considering how busy you are and stuff, you know, just taking the time to come and talk with us today, we can't thank you enough.
No, thank you guys for the opportunity and the platform. It's part of the reason why I like doing things like this is that it is actually, in its own way, a really nice way to pause and, like, reflect and think back. And it makes me grateful for all that I've been able to do and been exposed to, and the opportunities that I've had, because I am a first generation American. I can only imagine what my life would have been like, or what the opportunities would have been had that not been the case. And so I'm grateful for everything that I have and have been able to do so far. And I appreciate you guys and your time.
And we do genuinely appreciate you reflecting with us. So before you go, if you could, like, if you don't mind, just letting everyone know how they can sort of keep up to date with your good self, your music, and everything else you have going on. Sure.
So I have a Instagram handle that came out of, actually, when we were in Vegas for AEW, and someone called me the legal girl, and I just thought it was funny. So Instagram is really the only place that I am active on social media. But yeah, it's at MEGHA Legal Girl is the handle.
Like it.
But it was just so funny, because I'm like, I'm 36 years old, and, like, I've been practicing for 10 years. Like, legal girl, like, that's the best that you could come up with. But it was funny. I like taking my work seriously, but not myself. So
absolutely, best way to be. So before we let you go, just a reminder: AEW coming to the UK for the very first time, Wembley Stadium on Sunday the 27th of August. Tickets go on sale May the 5th, but you can also register for early access at ticketmaster.co.uk/AEW Wembley. And yeah, honestly, thank you so much again. We genuinely appreciate it.
Thank you guys for the support. We appreciate it.